The UFC, the world's premier mixed martial arts promotion, is known for showcasing the most skilled, resilient, and relentless fighters on the planet. But what happens when a fighter's conduct goes beyond the realm of acceptable sportsmanship or the sport's stringent rules? Let's dive into the most infamous stories of UFC fighters who, despite their skills and ambitions, found themselves permanently banned from the sport's biggest stage. Paul Daley. Semtex. Daley is a name that echoes through the world of mixed martial arts, hailed as a pioneer with explosive power and unforgettable fights. He burst onto the UFC scene with a vengeance, delivering electrifying knockouts against Martin Kampmann in September 2009 and Dustin Haslett in January 2010. His performances made it clear that he wasn't just here to compete, he was gunning for the welterweight title. Daley's ascent in the UFC earned him a shot at a title eliminator, pitting him against Josh Koscheck in what would become a career-defining clash. But Koscheck's wrestling skill grounded the British fighter, who struggled to find his usual rhythm. After the horn sounded, marking the end of a frustrating fight for Daley, the tension boiled over. In an unforgettable moment of heated passion, Daley threw a punch at Koscheck after the bell, crossing a line that UFC President Dana White would not tolerate. Dana White's response was swift and absolute. Daley was banned from the UFC indefinitely. White made his stance clear with an unyielding statement: "I don't care if he fights in every show all over the world and becomes the best, and everybody thinks he is the pound-for-pound best in the world. He will never fight in the UFC again." Following his ban, Daley continued to fight for more than a decade, finding a new home with Bellator, where he built a legacy and captivated fans with his thrilling style until his retirement in May 2022. Despite his exile from the UFC, Daley remains a legend in MMA, and his career is a reminder of the fine line between competitive fire and self-control in the high-stakes world of combat sports. Daley's story is far from isolated. Meet Rousimar Palhares, the submission specialist who ruled with an iron grip, blurring the lines between brilliance and brutality. Rousimar Palhares. Rousimar Palhares, the Brazilian powerhouse, carved out a reputation in the UFC, not just for his incredible grappling skills, but for the chilling fear he struck in his opponents. Between 2008 and 2013, he was one of the most feared grapplers in the octagon, earning a name for his relentless submission style that often went too far. Palhares, also known as Toquinho, had an unsettling habit, holding on to his submission locks long after his opponents had tapped. At UFC 111, he faced Tomasz Drwal and locked in a devastating heel hook, but when Drwal tapped, Palhares held the submission tight, cranking it even as the referee intervened. The UFC suspended him for 90 days, hoping he'd take the time to reflect, but just 3 years later, in his welterweight debut, Palhares did it again. This time, his opponent, Mike Pierce, tapped a staggering 8 times before Palhares finally released the hold. Dana White reacted to the incident saying, "This is the second incident we've had with Palhares. He had the lock and didn't let go," White said, explaining his decision to ban Palhares from the UFC just hours after the fight. "Finally, he let it go, but I'm going to cut him too." Palhares found his way to the World Series of Fighting, but old habits die hard. In yet another bout, he ignored his opponent's taps, pushing the limits of his submission hold once more. This repeated behavior ultimately led to his dismissal from the promotion, ending his career with yet another unresolved chapter in his saga. While Palhares grappled with his own set of challenges, Matt Riddle's exit from the UFC arose from an entirely different battleground, one that questioned his offstage decisions as much as his performance inside the cage. Matt Riddle was riding high in the UFC, chalking up an impressive 4-fight win streak and gaining momentum as a rising star. But his career took an abrupt turn after he tested positive twice for marijuana, triggering a swift exit from the promotion. Although not officially banned, UFC President Dana White made it crystal clear that Riddle would not be welcomed back, ever. White didn't hold back in explaining his decision. "Everybody's going to have an excuse of why they were cut," he said, recalling a controversial interview where Riddle reportedly claimed he smoked marijuana to manage his temper, saying it prevented him from beating his children. After Riddle tested positive, White's frustration was palpable. "He's a f***ing moron. That's why he's not here. He's cut because he's a moron." White's final word on the matter was as blunt as it was definitive. "I'll make it real. Easy for him. We just won't ask him to come back." However, while the UFC door closed, Riddle found new opportunities in professional wrestling, bringing his athleticism and charisma to a different stage. He eventually signed with WWE, where he became a staple performer on the NXT brand, carving out a successful career in sports entertainment. However, like Riddle, Ruslan Magomedov found himself on the wrong side of the UFC's rules, setting his career on a similarly turbulent path. Ruslan Magomedov. In the world of mixed martial arts, getting banned from the UFC isn't easy. Yet, for the Russian heavyweight Ruslan Magomedov, it only took a few strikes for the ultimate fighting career to be knocked out for good. Magomedov's trouble began in 2016 when he was caught using a selective androgen receptor modulator, SARM, a performance-enhancing substance intended to boost muscle growth. It was a calculated move to build power and stamina, but the risk didn't pay off. The consequence was a 2-year suspension, a serious slap on the wrist, and a warning to clean up his act if he wanted to stay in the ring. But it seemed he didn't get the message. In 2018, just 2 years later, he tested positive yet again, this time for 2 different steroid metabolites. It was a heavier blow to his career, as fans and officials alike questioned his dedication to fighting clean. With 2 strikes on his record, this fighter's credibility was quickly crumbling. However, February 2019 marked the end of his UFC career for good. When anti-doping officials asked for a sample, he refused to comply. For the United States Anti-Doping Agency, USADA, this was the last straw. A refusal to submit a sample is treated as an admission of guilt under their strict guidelines, and it was enough to prompt them to deliver the ultimate penalty, a lifetime ban. This ruling made him permanently ineligible to fight in the UFC, ensuring he would never step foot in the octagon again. For Magomedov, bending the rules ended his UFC dreams. But sometimes, a single impulsive moment is enough to derail a fighter's career, as Jason High would soon find out. Jason High. In the high-stakes world of mixed martial arts, respect for officials is as vital as skill and resilience in the cage. Jason High discovered this firsthand in 2014, following a controversial TKO loss to Rafael dos Anjos. Upset by what he perceived as an early stoppage, High impulsively shoved referee Kevin Mulhall, a decision that would ultimately cost him his career in the UFC. Dana White, however, is known for enforcing a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to breaches of conduct, especially involving physical altercations with referees or behavior after the bell. White did not mince words in the aftermath of High's incident, comparing High's behavior to Paul Daly's 2010 infraction where Daly struck an opponent after their fight ended. White announced, "You don't ever touch a referee ever. You're done here." To him, the integrity and respect of the sport were paramount, and touching an official violated both. Though High expressed remorse and attempted to apologize publicly via Twitter, White was unswayed, standing firm in his decision to sever High's UFC contract. This harsh but clear message emphasized White's stance. Fighters who disregard the rules of sportsmanship, especially in ways that compromise the authority of referees, have no place in the UFC. Since the incident, Jason High's ban has served as a reminder to UFC fighters and fans alike about the unforgiving consequences of stepping over the line. For the UFC, a fighter's behavior is just as crucial as their performance in the cage. High's career was cut short due to a moment of frustration in the ring, but for Thiago Silva, it was a series of actions outside the cage that led to an even more dramatic end. Thiago Silva. In the world of MMA, fighters are known for pushing boundaries, but for UFC veteran Thiago Silva, a shocking incident outside the cage led to a permanent exile from the sport's most prestigious organization. Thiago's career took a dark turn one night in Florida when he allegedly threatened his estranged wife with a gun, leading to a high-stakes 4-hour standoff with a SWAT team. With flashing lights, armed officers, and negotiations stretching into the night, it was a scene more suited to a Hollywood thriller than the career of a UFC contender. In the end, Thiago surrendered peacefully, but the damage to his reputation and his future in the sport was irreversible. Following the incident, UFC President Dana White made his stance clear. He will never fight in the UFC again. Known for his no-nonsense approach, White's decision left no room for negotiation, signaling that Thiago's time in the octagon was over, regardless of any future legal outcomes. Remarkably, all criminal charges against him were later dropped, but even with his legal slate cleared, his fate in the UFC was sealed. This wasn't just about a legal resolution. It was about upholding the UFC's image. The organization, which prides itself on discipline and respect, couldn't ignore the implications of such a public incident. Despite his years of experience and the fans he had won over, his alleged actions that night led to an unspoken ban that no cleared record could overturn. While Thiago's story involved law enforcement and a high-profile incident, BJ Penn's exit was equally gripping, though his struggle was as much with himself as with anyone else. BJ Penn. BJ Penn's name is legendary in the UFC. A former lightweight champion, Penn was one of the sport's earliest stars, debuting back in 2001 and helping propel mixed martial arts into the mainstream. But his later career took a much darker turn, marked by repeated losses and a controversial end to his fighting days. Penn's decline began to show in the cage long before his UFC exit. Despite a storied career, he hadn't tasted victory since 2010 and suffered a brutal 7-fight losing streak, culminating in his last match in May 2019. For fans who once cheered him on, it was painful to watch a once dominant fighter struggle with each appearance. Then came an incident that marked the end. In his native Hawaii, videos surfaced showing the 41-year-old Penn in a street fight, an image that didn't sit well with UFC President Dana White. In response, White made a decision that many saw as inevitable but long overdue. He won't fight again. That's it. That's a wrap, White stated, citing not just the brawl, but also years of concern over Penn's well-being. I didn't love him continuing to fight anyway, but with the relationship we have, he'd get me on the phone, begging for another fight. It's hard to turn him down. While White had allowed Penn to extend his career against his better judgment, the street fight was different. BJ needs to focus on his personal life before he thinks about fighting, White said. It was a candid and caring nudge, a push for Penn to find stability outside of the octagon before things went too far. BJ Penn's career ended amidst controversy outside the octagon, but Renato Sobral's infamous moment took place under the bright lights, when a single act left his reputation forever changed. Renato Sobral. Renato Babalu Sobral was once a respected light heavyweight title contender with a promising UFC career. However, in 2007, a single intense moment changed everything, not just for Sobral, but for how fans and the UFC viewed one of its most talented submission artists. The incident occurred during his clash with David Heath, a fight that remains infamous to this day. The tension in the octagon was palpable. Sobral, known for his powerful grappling skills, managed to lock Heath in an anaconda choke, one of the most relentless submission holds. As Heath struggled, the referee, Steve Mazzagatti, quickly realized the danger and ordered Sobral to release the choke. But Sobral had other ideas. With a stone-cold demeanor, he ignored the referee's demands, continuing to squeeze until Heath went limp. Fans and officials alike were stunned by the move, but the real shock came afterward. During the post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, Sobral delivered an unapologetic confession. He admitted he had purposely held the choke to teach Heath a lesson. The calmness with which he justified his decision only intensified the outrage, casting a dark cloud over what should have been a decisive victory. Dana White, the UFC president, didn't hesitate to take action. Known for his tough stance on sportsmanship, White saw Sobral's actions as a flagrant violation of the UFC's code. Completely unacceptable, White said, addressing the incident. This is the fight game and so it happens, but no way can you do what he did. Sobral's career ended with a single, fateful decision. Similarly, Wanderlei Silva's legacy was marked by intensity and grit, but a different kind of fallout awaited him. Wanderlei Silva. In 2014, Brazilian MMA fighter Wanderlei Silva faced a career-shattering decision that would ultimately sever his ties with the UFC and the Nevada State Athletic Commission. It all started when Silva, once a celebrated figure in the sport, fled from a surprise drug test. This impulsive choice to dodge the test brought immediate repercussions, leading to a rare lifetime ban from the Nevada State Athletic Commission, a sanction so severe it stunned even UFC President Dana White. White voiced his astonishment over Silva's bold move, noting, "Nobody has ever run from a drug test before. I didn't see a life ban coming." For White, Silva's evasion had put him in an unprecedented and very serious situation, leaving little room for sympathy. White added that Silva's actions essentially Pete Rose-ed his career, a reference to the baseball icon banned from the Hall of Fame for misconduct. White made it clear that Silva's legacy was now irreparably tarnished, with no chance of entering the Hall of Fame. Silva's lifetime ban was eventually overturned, briefly rekindling hopes for a return. But instead of quietly moving forward, the beloved Brazilian stirred up fresh controversy. In 2015, Silva made a sensational accusation, claiming the UFC was fixing fights, a statement that shocked the MMA world and ignited a legal firestorm with the promotion. The UFC responded swiftly, filing a lawsuit that ultimately forced Silva to issue a public apology and retract his allegations. Days after his apology, the UFC released him from his contract, officially closing the door on his time with the organization. Free from UFC restrictions, Silva went on to compete twice in Bellator before retiring in September 2022, marking the end of a turbulent yet unforgettable career. After Silva's career-defining clashes with the UFC and the law, the spotlight shifted to another Brazilian talent stepping into the octagon with high hopes: Igor Severino. In an eagerly anticipated matchup, Severino stepped into the octagon for his UFC debut against fellow Brazilian Andre Lima, both fighters entering with undefeated records and high hopes for their futures. Fans expected an exciting contest that would showcase their skills and determination. However, the fight took a surprising turn that no one anticipated. As the second round progressed, the intensity of the bout increased, with Severino working to secure a takedown against Lima. The back-and-forth action kept the audience on the edge of their seats, but as the round wore on, Severino found himself struggling to gain the upper hand. In a moment of frustration, he made an impulsive decision that would change the course of the fight by biting Lima on the arm. The referee, immediately noticing the bite marks, stopped the action. A hush fell over the crowd as the situation unfolded. After a brief review, the referee disqualified Severino, leading to disbelief among the fans and officials alike. It was a rare and unusual incident in a sport where discipline and control are paramount. Following the disqualification, UFC President Dana White quickly addressed the media, expressing his disappointment over the incident. These were two up-and-coming undefeated fighters, he noted, highlighting the wasted opportunity for both athletes to demonstrate their skills. White stressed that there are many ways to express frustration during a fight, but resorting to biting was unacceptable. If you get frustrated and want out of the fight, there are plenty of ways to do it, but the worst thing you can do is bite your opponent, he stated, emphasizing the importance of maintaining composure in the octagon. Just as Severino's shocking disqualification reverberated through the sport, Nick Diaz found himself on the receiving end of a penalty that changed his career forever. Nick Diaz, one of MMA's most controversial and charismatic figures, saw his UFC career halted in 2015 after his third positive test for marijuana. Known for his relentless fighting style and fearless personality, Diaz built a dedicated fan base over years of headlining fights against elite opponents. Yet, his repeated run-ins with athletic commissions over marijuana use ultimately led to a severe punishment that not only stalled his career, but all but erased his future in the UFC. Following his third positive test, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, NSAC, imposed one of its harshest penalties yet, a 5-year suspension from competing in Nevada and a fine of $165,000. This decision was met with widespread criticism, as many saw the punishment as overly harsh, especially in comparison to lighter penalties issued for more severe infractions. The penalty reflected NSAC's firm stance at the time against repeated drug offenses, despite growing public debate over marijuana use, particularly in states where it had been legalized. For Nick Diaz, however, the repercussions didn't end with NSAC's decision. UFC President Dana White took the matter further, banning Diaz from the UFC for life. White's zero-tolerance stance on repeated drug offenses left Diaz without a professional home, and he has not fought in any official octagon since the ban was imposed. This exclusion cut Diaz off from the sport he helped popularize and from an organization that had both defined and propelled his career. While some fans hoped to see Diaz return as marijuana policies evolved, the ban held, leaving one of MMA's most distinctive athletes sidelined. Nick Diaz's case serves as an example of the stark consequences athletes can face for repeated violations of substance regulations, especially during an era of shifting perspectives on marijuana use. Many fighters and fans argue that Diaz's personality, combined with his high-octane fighting style, made him uniquely appealing to audiences, sparking campaigns and social media movements demanding a reconsideration of his punishment. While Diaz's battle was with substance regulations, War Machine's troubles went far beyond the octagon, unfolding into a tragic and dark chapter. War Machine. Jonathan Copenhaver, better known as War Machine, once showed promise in the world of mixed martial arts, MMA. Originally a contestant on The Ultimate Fighter 6, his raw talent and aggression in the cage earned him a shot in the UFC. However, his time in the organization was marked by turbulent decisions and controversy that ultimately led to his permanent ban. War Machine's first stint with the UFC came to a halt due to inappropriate comments he made about fellow fighter Evan Tanner, who tragically passed away. Although the UFC decided to release him following this incident, the door to his MMA career was not yet fully closed. He continued fighting professionally, even scoring some victories in organizations outside of the UFC, but his personal life remained a source of ongoing issues. Known for his short temper and trouble with the law, Copenhaver had a string of arrests that cast a shadow over his career, suggesting that his issues extended far beyond the cage. The situation escalated in 2014 with a brutal and highly publicized assault on his then-girlfriend, Christy Mack. In an episode of shocking violence, War Machine allegedly entered Mac's residence and subjected her to a prolonged attack, leaving her with broken ribs, teeth, and serious injuries that required hospitalization. This attack left the MMA community horrified and led to his immediate arrest. In a legal case that gripped the media, Koppenhaver was found guilty on numerous counts, including assault and kidnapping, leading to a life sentence in prison with no possibility of parole until 36 years have passed. Following the troubling saga of War Machine, Michael Falcão faced his own downfall, driven by controversies outside the cage. Michael Falcão, a Brazilian mixed martial artist with a fierce fighting style, briefly made waves in the UFC with his powerful strikes and potential. After joining the UFC and securing a win in his debut fight, he was seen as a promising addition to the middleweight division. However, Falcao's tenure was unexpectedly short-lived, not due to his performance in the cage, but because of his actions outside of it. In 2011, just months before he was set to face Tom Lawler at UFC 134, news surfaced that Falcão had a dark history. It was revealed that he had been arrested in 2002 for allegedly assaulting a woman outside of a nightclub in Brazil. This revelation ignited a backlash among UFC fans who were vocal in calling for his immediate dismissal. The public outcry and the gravity of the accusations compelled the UFC to release him, effectively ending his career with the organization before it had fully begun. Though Falcão continued to compete in other promotions, his reputation was permanently tarnished. Despite being a talented fighter, he struggled to shake the notoriety of his past, with the assault charges casting a shadow over any accomplishments he achieved in the ring. His UFC ban highlighted the organization's growing emphasis on its fighters' conduct outside the octagon, as well as the power of fans' voices in influencing the sport. After Falcao's career was cut short by scandal, another UFC fighter faced his own battles, but this time it was an anti-doping test that threatened Tom Lawler's path. Tom Lawler, a distinctive figure in combat sports, saw his UFC career cut short, not by a high-profile defeat, but by a suspension and eventual release stemming from an anti-doping violation. Known as Filthy Tom, Lawler carved out a name for himself with an eccentric persona and gritty performances in the octagon. He debuted in the UFC in 2008, quickly becoming a fan favorite with his entertaining walkouts and fearless fighting style. Yet, in 2016, Lawler's UFC journey took an abrupt turn when he tested positive for ostarine, a banned substance flagged during an out-of-competition test conducted by the US anti-doping agency, USADA. Ostarine, often used for its muscle-building effects, is classified as a selective androgen receptor modulator, SARM. Though it has gained attention in the fitness community, it remains prohibited in professional sports due to its performance-enhancing properties. Following the test result, USADA imposed a 2-year suspension on Lawler, ruling him ineligible to fight until October 2018. Despite maintaining that he never knowingly ingested the substance, Lawler faced a forced hiatus from the octagon. While his suspension sidelined him from MMA, Lawler pivoted toward professional wrestling, bringing his charisma and athleticism to this new stage. As he waited to be eligible to return to UFC competition, his career continued to evolve, and he built a reputation in the wrestling world as a dedicated performer. However, just 1 month before his ban was set to be lifted, Lawler received unexpected news. He was released from the UFC, effectively ending his mixed martial arts career within the promotion. The release left many fans questioning the UFC's decision. Lawler's journey emphasizes the challenges athletes face under strict anti-doping policies, where a single test result can impact years of training and dedication. Lawler, however, managed to keep his fighting spirit alive, adapting his career to new arenas despite the setback. While Lawler shifted to professional wrestling, Diego Brandão, another fiery fighter, encountered a struggle of his own, one that placed his future with the UFC in jeopardy. Diego Brandão's UFC career began with high expectations, but ultimately came to an abrupt end due to a combination of failed drug tests and legal issues. Known for his aggressive fighting style and explosive finishes, Brandão gained attention as the featherweight winner of The Ultimate Fighter Season 14, showcasing his potential to rise within the ranks. Yet, by early 2016, his position within the UFC had become precarious, and his future with the organization was thrown into serious doubt. On January 2, 2016, Brandão tested positive for a prohibited substance, marking a significant infraction under the UFC's anti-doping policy. Known for enforcing a strict stance on drug violations, UFC President Dana White saw the incident as a breach of the organization's values and standards. Although other fighters have managed to return from similar violations after serving suspensions, Brandão's troubles did not end with the failed drug test. Just months later, he faced an additional and more serious issue outside of the octagon. However, in April 2016, Brandão's UFC career hit an irreversible turning point when he was charged with a felony. Reports allege that he was involved in an altercation at a nightclub in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he reportedly brandished a gun during a heated dispute. This serious criminal charge compounded the previous doping violation, solidifying Brandau's fate with the promotion. While he had shown great promise in the sport, his actions placed him on a rapidly descending path, one that the UFC could no longer ignore. Subsequently, Brandau was released from the organization, marking a stark and sudden end to his UFC tenure. Brandau's case serves as a cautionary tale about the rigorous standards and zero-tolerance policies enforced within professional sports. The UFC, known for its firm response to violations and misconduct, severed ties with Brandau, underscoring that behavior both inside and outside the cage directly impacts a fighter's career. Brandau's career trajectory, from a highly touted prospect to a fighter expelled from the promotion, reflects the importance of discipline and the consequences of crossing professional boundaries. Today, Diego Brandau's name is remembered not only for his prowess in the cage, but also as a reminder of the strict boundaries set by the UFC for its athletes, showing that skill alone is not enough to secure longevity in the sport. For more videos like this, click on the next card.